Okay, now we're going to talk about mesh particle emitters. So if you still have the particle system in your game, you can right click on it and delete it from your hierarchy. Now if you want to have particles bound by something other than an ellipsoid, as in the ellipsoid particle emitter that you just had, you can use a mesh particle emitter. So to do that, you drag a mesh onto the scene in your hierarchy. You can use game object, create other, and use a cube. So let's just do that for now. Game object, create other, cube. So now you have this cube. The components in the cube are a mesh here, a collider here, and a renderer here. I'm going to right click on mesh renderer and remove component. So now there's nothing to render this cube. It's just a collider and a mesh. I'm going to go to component, particles, mesh particle emitter, and click on it. So now I have a particle emitter that's going to emit particles based on this mesh instead of an ellipsoid like before. But I also have to add an animator and a renderer. So go to component, particles, particle animator, and component, particles, particle renderer. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to change the material on my particle renderer from none to fire add, and there are these tiny little fire material particles at the corners of the cube, so it's only at the vertices right now. I'm going to change the size, make it a little bit bigger. I'm also going to change the velocity, so the local velocity. I'll have some motion. So you can see these particles are definitely behaving differently than they were on the ellipsoid. In the mesh particle emitter, there are also some settings that aren't on the regular particle emitter, that is to say the ellipsoid particle emitter. And that is interpolate triangles, which means that right now you'll notice that they're being emitted only at the vertices. Interpolate triangles means they will be emitted throughout the entire mesh, like this. Systematic means that they'll be emitted in order, so that it's only on the vertices, but it'll be emitted systematically. So, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, instead of just a random spawning around all the vertices. I'm going to uncheck systematic. Min and max normal velocity refers to the deviance from the mesh that these particles have. So 0 means they adhere exactly to the mesh. So if you change the velocity to 0, right now they're perfectly defined in the mesh. If you change the min and max normal velocity, then you get some small deviance from this mesh. I'm going to change that to 0, and that to 0. Now, the mesh setting here determines which mesh in the game you're going to use for this emitter. Right now you're using a cube, but you can really use anything you want. You can use a palm tree, you can use the lerps model. If you click on lerps, zoom back a little bit, you can see that there's a humanoid figure here. You can see little ears here once in a while. You can definitely see the arms and the hands. And it's not instantly recognizable as lerps, but you could model something to look better if you wanted to. Actually, I'll make the emissions more. Change this to 200. And I'll make the particles smaller, 0.1 again. So now it looks a little more like lerps. And you can, here in the mesh, in the emitter, select palm, zoom back a little bit, and you see that it looks like a palm tree. Although the fronds aren't getting much love right now, it's just the trunk. So anyway, you can play around with what kinds of meshes you use here, and get some different results from the particle emitter. So in this section you learned about particle systems, you learned how to create a particle emitter, a particle animator, and a particle renderer, and how to use all those three components. You also learned about line renderers to create 3D lines in 3D space, and trail renderers to create trails that die over time that you can parent to other objects. You also learned about world colliders that allow your particles to interact with objects around them, and you learned about mesh particle emitters, which allow particles to be emitted within the bounds of a custom mesh that you define in Unity.